G'day poker people, welcome back. After an absolute killer session on a Sunday afternoon, I was way ahead of schedule for the $50 an hour at 1-3 challenge, and I still needed to close out the month though and do my best to not fumble the ball from at this point. So I was in the very next day for a Monday evening session. I don't usually play on Mondays, but one thing I really like to do when I've been running hot and playing well is just to play as much sessions as I possibly can in that time frame. I think it does a lot to have a big win, and then you go in with a lot of confidence the next day. So I wanted to take full advantage of the run good and pop in and do a Monday night session. So get into the game at about 20 past 8, play 1-2 for about 20 minutes where I do end up losing $13. So again, just with the abysmal 1-2 win rate, I'm very lucky that this is not a $50 an hour at 1-2 challenge. Whatever the case, we're in the 1-3 game, time to take it serious. Let's see if we can get the win rate even higher. So let's not waste any more time and get to gambling. Let's go! So we're in the 1-3 streets for 1,000 bangers where we play this first interesting hand. There's two open limps before I'm on the button with ace jack offsuit. I raise it up to 20 and then I only get called by a passive under the gun limper. So it heads up to a flop of king queen 9 rainbow. When the villain checks it over to me, could go either way between c-betting and checking. I decide to bet in this instance, trying to fold out my opponent's hands that are worse than a 9x. A bit dicey though, the opponent's going to have a lot of strong hands on this board. I bet in this instance, I make it 15, then under the gun calls. So it heads up to a turn, which is the queen of clubs putting out backdoor clubs. The villain checks it over to me, but this is honestly an awful turn for us. The opponent's going to have a bunch of king x and queen x hands in their range here, which we are not going to be able to fold. So I think I just have to check it back and see a river. So we see that river, which is the 7 of spades. Now undergun checks it over to me again, and now I'm less convinced that they do have a king x or queen x hand in their range. I think a lot of those will just come out and bet on the river. So I start to get some evil thoughts in my mind. If the opponent has a 9x or a pocket pair worse than 9x, being a passive opponent, they might have called it on the flop, but those hands are just not going to be able to call a big bet on the river, so it might be a good spot to go ahead and mix in a bluff. Need to go big though, don't want a passive opponent to just shrug and call me off with like 9-8, so I go ahead and make it 120, then under the gun tanks for about 15 seconds before folding. So let's go, we get a bluff through on the first interesting hand of the session. Yeah, I love to see it. Next hand up is my favorite. Double bomb pot time, baby. Let's go. We're only playing 5-handed. A bunch of people actually decide to sit out the bomb pot. I would never do that because I love these bloody things, but whatever the case, we're only playing 5-handed, which definitely plays into the dynamics of the upcoming hand. So I'm in the under the gun position with a 10-3 of spades. We see two flops, and the first one is 8-8-7 with 2 spades, and the second one is a 9-5 deuce with 2 spades. We have a flush draw on both boards, but also only 10 high on both boards. When the blinds check it over to me, I decide to semi-bluff in this spot. It is a bit better since we are short-handed. I'm more likely to get folds, but I mean, still betting into two people who haven't acted, who could easily just have an 8x combination. It's a bit dicey. I go for it this time. I roll the dice. I bet 30, and then I only get called by a tight aggressive button. So it heads up to 2 different turns. The first one is the queen of spades, let's go, we make our flush, and the second one is the jack of clubs. The action's on me, and now I'm feeling a lot more secure in the strength of my hand, being that I have made my flush, and I think I can keep my foot on the pedal and try to bluff my opponent off of a chop on the second board. We actually beat any ace 8x on the first board, so if they have an 8x with a kicker higher than 10 high, or 8x with a pair, we might actually be able to fold them off of that as a chop. Also, if they only have like a 9 on the second board, I think they're probably not going to continue when the jack comes as an overcard. So definitely want to bluff here. I go ahead and make it 100, and then the button throws in the call. So not quite what we wanted to see, but we still do have another chance on the river. First one is the 6 of diamonds, and the second one is the jack of hearts. And now really want to continue barreling. I think it is very likely my opponent does have an 8x hand, but I don't think those hands are going to be able to call on the river unless they have a full house. So really just trying to put max pressure on to bluff my opponent off of a chop. So I go ahead and absolutely bomb it. 420, blaze it, let's go. Let's try and get these chops to fold. And then the opponent is in the tank, probably a good 60 seconds or so. They are really not liking this spot. I think it's very likely that they do have an 8x combination, which honestly we do scoop against some 8x, but some of those 8x are just going to be like if they have ace 8, they beat us with ace high on the second board. So I think this is a really good spot to try and bluff them off of a chop. And then they're in the tank, probably with one of those hands hands, and eventually they decide on a fold. So let's go. We're blasting off this session, but it's working out so far. So things are going well this session, but they're about to get even better because we are under the gun with pocket aces. Let's go. I make it 10, and then I get called by a tight aggressive +1 before a loose aggressive button player 3-bets to 20. So I get 2x'd with the 3-bet, but things get even better when the small blind passive player 4-bets to 50. Oh, you love to see that when you have aces. And then a passive big blind actually cold calls the 50, so the action's back on me, and straight away, I definitely want to go ahead and 4-bet in this situation. When a passive player 4-bets, that range is strong, and even if it's not, they're just not going to go ahead and fold to a 4-bet. Maybe they would fold to an all-in, so maybe I need to slice it down to just keep all of their hands in. I go ahead and make it 150, then the cold caller folds, and then the action's back on the button, who tanks for 2 years. He's clearly got a pretty big decision here. The min-click 3-bet's usually pretty strong, so I think they're sensing a lot of strength from both me and the small blind, and they do eventually fold, and the action's back on the small blind, and now they're tanking forever as well. And to go on a little bit of a quick tangent here, it is one of the most annoying things in live poker when one person tanks forever and they end up folding, and then the next person to act tanks forever as well. It's like, bro, what were you thinking about when the first person was tanking? Like, you had so much time to make a decision. Like, it's different if they raise or call, but if they fold, like, bro, you should know what you're going to do in that spot. Whatever the case, it's a recreational player, probably shouldn't get too upset, but they end up tanking forever as well, but eventually they do call, which we love to see, and then the big blind cold caller folds, so we are heads up to a flop of Queen Jack 7 with 2 spades. Small blind checks it over to me. Definitely want to go ahead and get some value here, but I really want to bet small just to keep my opponent's ace-x combinations in there. So I go ahead and make it 80, and then the small blind rips all in for 300. And look, if they have queens or jacks, I'm going to be happy to pay them off here, but I still think they have all of the pocket kings combinations, probably ace queen as well. And if they did have ace king, I wouldn't be totally shocked if they're bluffing over my small bet. So I'm going to throw in the call here, but I'm not expecting to win 100% of the time. I do throw in the call though, and then the opponent does not want to show his hand. The turn is the 4 of diamonds and the river is the 2 of clubs. The small blind shakes his head disapprovingly, so I end up showing him my pocket aces, and then he shows ace queen of clubs. So not sure why he felt totally defeated with that hand, but whatever the case, I'm not going to complain. Even though the hand took 5 years to take place, we do end up winning a 970 pot. Let's go. So I didn't actually VPip in this hand, but it's a pretty sick hand nonetheless. One villain ended up turning quads and getting it all in against a straight flush draw, and the straight flush draw got there on the river, so it was a straight flush beating quads. Pretty sick, very rare to see. Unfortunately, no bad beat jackpot at Derby, so that would have been pretty cool to get a table share, but I mean, Derby does so many generous promotions outside of bad beats, so I'm not going to chuck a sook about it. Just crazy to see a straight flush beat quads. Might be the only time I ever see it in live poker, so definitely wanted to take a picture. This next hand's a bit of a fun one, also a bit of a weird one. You'll see what we mean. So a loose aggressive player opens under the gun to 10, then a tight aggressive cutoff 3-bets it to 30, and then I'm on the button with pocket kings. Let's go. What a spot to wake up with yet another premium. I go ahead and 4-bet it to 100. And then the under the gun player is in the tank again. This player is definitely very fond of tanking, to be honest. And after a while, he actually decides to flip a coin, and then the coin lands on heads, I think, and he ends up calling the 100, and then the cutoff actually folds. So we are heads up with the under the gun player to a flop of ace 7-5 with 2 clubs, and then the under the gun player lead shoves for 300, which I was not expecting. My initial instinct is to be worried that he did flop an ace, but on further inspection, I'm not actually fully convinced that he would just open shove with an ace here, unless it's ace king specifically. Ace king also possible, to be honest, but if it's a worse ace X, wouldn't he be worried that I flopped ace king myself? Like, it just seems a bit suspicious. I think it's more likely he has a flush draw, or maybe even just an airball bluff in this spot, and he's trying to fold me off a hand like pocket kings, like pocket queens. So with that in mind, and that being my read, I do actually decide to call off with the pocket kings here, and then the under the gun player tells me straight away I have an ace, and I'm like, it's good, mate. And he shows ace-3 of spades, so we are in awful shape here, and the turn is the jack of clubs, no help for us, the river's a 10 of clubs, so we're actually going to end up losing, and honestly, fair play to the villain, because I really did not think he'd open shove with an ace-x hand, but power to him, he did, and he got us for max value. GG. So I do think I'd been playing pretty well so far in this session, but this next hand, things start to come off the rails a bit. I think I was feeling a bit of tilt after the pocket kings getting cracked, but we'll get into the hand and you'll see what I mean. So it starts off with a loose aggressive under the gun player making it 10, and then a loose aggressive small blind 3-betting to 25. The action's on my big blind, and I look down at 10-8 of diamonds. Now I do think this is a really, really good spot to 4-bet as a bluff. I just can't imagine that the small blind 3-bet such a small size with an absolute premium hand, particularly with their loose aggressive image. So I think it's a spot where we're probably going to get lots of folds with a 4-bet. I mean, 10-8 suited, not the best hand selection wise to use this one. Would rather something with an ace or a king that blocks my opponent's ace king plus combinations, but might still be a good spot to go for it. And I decided to go for it in this instance. I 4-bet to 75. Now I think this is the real mistake in the hand, is I just 4-bet way too small. I don't think the small blind is going to fold anything that he 3-bet. When I 4-bet to such a small size, I think I need to be going 100 or larger to really realize as much fold equity, which is completely what we want when we only have 10 high in this situation. So I make a pretty silly play here, and I only 4-bet to 75, and then can probably tell what's happening next. Both under the gun and the small blind call to 75. So yeah, not in love with that decision. Whatever the case, we are 3 ways to a flop of 9-5 deuce rainbow with 1 diamond. When the small blind checks it over to me, I just think both the opponents have so many pocket pairs in their range, probably none of which are going to be folding on this board. Maybe 3s and 4s, but it's just such a tight range. I would rather not be blasting off into 2 different opponents that can have strong hands on this board, so I check it. And then fortunately under the gun player checks as well. So we are still 3 ways to a turn, which is the 10 of clubs. Let's go. We do make top pair, and the small blind bets out for 150. Now being that the small blind is a loose aggressive opponent, I think the chances that they're bluffing on this board is pretty likely. There's so many draws, clubs, queen jack, 8-7, even king queen has a gut shot, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if they were betting with all those hands with their loose aggressive image. So I do decide to throw in the call here. Definitely a bit dicier with the under the gun player left to act. They definitely could have turned a stronger 10 than us, but I decide to throw in the call here, hoping that they fold. But then the undergun player does not fold. They throw in the call as well, which is concerning because now I have to beat 2 different ranges, both of which probably have 10x combinations better than mine. So when the river is the 6 of hearts and we don't improve, and the small blind keeps betting for 375, I think I just have to go ahead and fold my top pair here. If I was heads up with the small blind, I would definitely consider calling, with being they are so loose aggressive when pretty much all the draws except for 8-7 missed. But I think with the under the gun play still left to act, and they can just easily snap me off with ace-10, I have to fold here, and I do. I make the snap fold, and then the under the gun player folds queen jack offsuit face up. So they were on a draw. We did have them beat. Small blind mucks, but honestly, I'm pretty happy with this fold. I think they had us beat. But if I'm 4-bet bluffing, I definitely need to use a larger size next time. Start a tight aggressive hijack opens to 15, and then the loose aggressive cutoff. We've been playing a lot of hands with calls, and I'm on the button with queen jack of diamonds. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 65. Definitely better sizing this time when we have position and we don't honestly mind getting calls in this spot with such a strong hand. I make it 65, and then both the villains call. So we're 3 ways to a flop of ace queen deuce a rainbow with no diamonds. When the villains check it over to me, I'm just going to check it, take a free turn. I think both the opponents probably have a lot of ace x in their range, so I check it. We get the free turn, which is the 5 of diamonds, completing the 4-card rainbow. The hijack checks it over to the loose aggressive cutoff, who goes ahead and bets 150. And now I think it's pretty likely that this opponent could be bluffing. I mean, there aren't a lot of natural bluffs on this board, but if they call pre-flop with like jack 9 offsuit, they're probably just going to stab when the action checks through to them on 2 streets. So good spot to defend our range and throw in a call. That's what I do here. And then the hijack folds, which is pretty fortunate because if they called, I would be pretty worried when there's no natural draws on the board. Whatever the case, we're heads up to a river with the aggressive cutoff, and it is the 8 of hearts. The villain checks it over to me. It's now feeling pretty confident about the strength of our hand, but not confident enough to bet. Wouldn't be totally shocked if the villain was planning to check call with king queen or maybe even a weak ace. So I go ahead and check it, take the free showdown, and the villain says, "You're good." I end up showing my queen and scooping in this pot. Let's go. So there you have it, the most interesting hands we played on this Monday night session. Only ended up getting in about 5 hours and 10 minutes of the 1-3 game itself before my table ended up breaking, unfortunately, although I suppose you could have suspected the game would break early on a Monday night. Still glad I went in and got some volume to push myself closer to the 50 hours. In terms of how I feel about my actual decisions in hands, the only real error I can point at is the 10-8 suited 4-bet, but it's only a mistake because I chose the wrong sizing. I think if I went ahead and made it like 125 or bigger there, it will be a fine play and just a good spot to 4-bet bluff, in all honesty. But yeah, because I size small, it's definitely a mistake, but don't want to be too harsh on myself for that one slip up. So I am going to give myself an A grade for today. Very happy with the other decisions I made. Definitely played aggressive in spots where I thought my opponent was weak, and set some traps to let my aggressive opponents hang themselves, so to speak. So very happy with my play today. Think I earned the A grade and had pretty decent results, especially for a Monday night session, which is always happy to see. It definitely does increase our winnings so far in the challenge. Somehow our win rate actually went down, even though we won $90 an hour today, but that's only because it was so colossally high after the heater in the previous session. So very happy with how the challenge is going so far. Way over the $50 an hour mark, but we've still got almost half of the challenge to go if we want to get these 50 hours before the end of the month. So we will back in for a new session, which we'll cover in my next vlog. But for now, I'm out of here. Arrivederci.